Cool. So, are you guys seeing my screen already? I don't know. I don't know how we're going here.
Oh, no,
Probably have to hit the share
I got
screen or something
I gotta do that here.
as Kitsy runs away. People can see you. I love it when it says people can see you. I laugh at that. But let me show. Where are the webcams?
Yeah, turn your webcams on, you guys.
Yeah, mine disappeared, which is a little bit weird.
We also have a small group. I'm not sure. Well, it's my lack of giving good notice. But
Show webcams. My webcams are gone. Oh, here they are. Okay, cool. Hey, so good afternoon, morning, evening, night, whatever time it is in your part of the world. We don't have a very big group today, but that's completely all right. We're going to talk about MySQL today. MySQL Server, some people will pronounce that. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what it's for, just kind of general stuff, and then we're going to try to demystify some of this stuff around the command line. And you can see I've got a little cheat sheet over here on my left. You don't have to worry about too much about this yet, but I think it's important that people who want to fly the developer flag at least have a different perception of what MySQL is all about compared to something like this, which is a MySQL administration tool called PHP MyAdmin. So most of you are probably familiar with this tool. We're going to talk a little bit about what this tool is, what it does, and why it's so awesome or so horrible, depending on your perspective. So it's mostly awesome, but I'm going to add a couple horrible things in there that most people don't realize because it's important to understand. So first off, MySQL. This is not a conversation around, like, generally speaking, what is MySQL. The assumption is you know what it is at a very high level, and so what that is a database management tool or system, piece of software that runs on hundreds of millions of computers around the world. It is the M in the LAMP stack acronym. We think about Linux, the operating system, Apache, the web server, MySQL, the database server, and then PHP, the middleware or the middle layer, some people call that. So the database layer in typical web applications, and of course backends to lots and lots of mobile apps, are powered by MySQL. So MySQL is a relational database management system that is a lot like Microsoft's SQL offering or Oracle's SQL offering or Sybase, and there's lots of different relational models, but MySQL took off, I think, because it's awesome, and of course it doesn't cost anything. So that's the overall what MySQL is. So an SQL instance, or a MySQL instance, we say, is basically just a piece of software running on a server somewhere. That's all it is. And so it can be a piece of software running on an Amazon cloud server, a Rackspace cloud server, your MacBook, your Mac Mini, whatever. It's just a piece of software running on a computer. And I think I say that very deliberately because a lot of people want to make it something bigger than it is. And it's not anything more than that. It's just software. And so this software doesn't do anything on its own. Developers like you and I have to ask it to do things. And in essence, what we're asking it to do are two really fundamental things, and really three if you want to kind of throw the third one in there. But the two things that we ask it to do are store data, persist data, long-term over months or years or decades of time, and then return that data to us when we ask for it. Those are the two things that we do. And so the kinds of data that you store and the kinds of things that you ask it to return to you, of course, depend largely on what you're trying to accomplish. But in the web world, you can think of things like a forum at buzztouch.com. It might be storing forum posts, and we might be asking it for certain forum posts at certain times. So really, that's what we do. So the third thing, which is kind of the little dangling side to this, is that it's assumed that we also understand that in order for it to store data, we also have to ask it to do things like change data, delete data, update data. So these common operations, it's assumed that, of course, we have to be able to do that. You can't just say store things. You have to tell it to do that. So store stuff, retrieve stuff, and then allow us to manipulate. So I think most of us understand that. Most of us understand that. So I'm going to jump over here to this tool called PHP MyAdmin. We'll talk about what it is before we jump into the command line stuff, the demystifying the command line, because it's important that we get our head around a couple of concepts. So this is the MySQL, or excuse me, the PHP MyAdmin tool, the demo tool that they have on their site at phpmyadmin.net. There's a demo. And everything that we have on the left here, this big long list of things on the left, these are databases. These are databases. So we've got CROA, My Data, Netso. I assume these are PayPal. I assume these are databases that people have created in this demo. And there's lots and lots of them. So the first thing that we have to understand, and people do get confused on this, is you have one instance of this software running on a server. One instance called MySQL. Its job is to manage all of the data. But in order to do that, it also has to manage other things like databases and users and things like this. So don't get confused when someone talks about a database versus the MySQL server software running, because there's two different things. And so this is a great example of that, because you can see there's a couple of dozen databases here on one server. Very, very common. Very, very common. And one way in CodeCamp that I tried to talk about in Vegas last week or 2 weeks ago, tried to talk about data, was I tried to draw an analogy between a spreadsheet and a table. We'll get to tables here in a minute. But one way to understand this is, imagine a bunch of spreadsheets. These are going to be database tables here as we talk our way through this hour today. Imagine a bunch of spreadsheets in a folder. I would call that a database. One folder holds a bunch of spreadsheets. If you created another folder with another series of spreadsheets, that would be another database. So each of these databases on the left are collections of spreadsheets, collections of tables that allow the developer to organize data. And you can create as many databases as you want, and of course, tons and tons of tables inside each database. So if I click in my PHP MyAdmin, there's a little plus here. It'll show me the tables in each of these databases. So this person created a database called MTSAND and San Andreas. I don't know what this is, but you can see each one of these items is a table. So a table, if you think spreadsheet, is a conceptual idea. It's just an idea. The only reason it looks like a spreadsheet is because this tool, PHP MyAdmin, displays it that way to us. That's the only reason we can draw this kind of human relationship with columns and rows that the computer doesn't really understand. So this tool makes it it makes it visually appealing to kind of browse our data. And so I'm showing you this tool because I think most people have seen it and they're familiar with it. And so across the top of this list, we have what would be like columns in a spreadsheet, and they all have names and they all have what we call data types, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then going down the list, we have rows of data. So every table is in essence like a spreadsheet. So that table I clicked on the left was called admin history. Here's another table called dancers. Here's another table called elevators, interiors, items, lot. There's all kinds of things in here. And you can see that whoever organized this database, vehicles, is breaking down their tables into distinct things, elevators and items and vehicles and wire transfers and shops and all these different things that they've created. Imagine each one of these being a spreadsheet. So MySQL doesn't understand that the software running on our server, MySQL, doesn't understand this visual approach to things. But PHP MyAdmin is a tool that lets us visualize. So that's a wonderful thing, and there's nothing wrong with PHP MyAdmin in most cases. And it allows you to do things like manipulate the structure of your database. It allows you to issue SQL commands. It allows you to do lots of different things in a browser. I'm on the browser here, and I'm on a web address that you could only otherwise do with, say, the command line like we're going to talk about today. And so Sue gets happy when we look at the PHP MyAdmin tool, and I think a lot of the rest of you do too, because it appears to be easy. So, yeah, that's good, right? It appears to be easy. Let's talk about that for a second. Easy to do what? It's the question I ask as a developer. Easy to visualize information? Sure. Unless, and there's a big asterisk there, easy to insert new rows of data? Sure. Unless, and there's a big asterisk there. Easy to sort and filter and manipulate stuff? Of course it is. But there's always an asterisk there. And when I say there's always an asterisk there, we have to keep in mind that what we're using here is a web page. We're using a PHP-powered web page to manipulate the data in our database. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, if you think about it, we use PHP all the time in Buzztouch to allow you to manipulate our database, right? You make a new forum post, it's a PHP script that enters a record into our database, same idea, right? The difference between this and that, though, is oftentimes when you're administering a PHP or a MySQL database, you have to do things fast, you have to do things securely, you have to do things in bulk, right? So some of these things cause problems when you're using a web page to do it. For example, this query right here, select all from vehicles. I don't even know whose database this is. It's the demo, but I'm going to run this query. Select all from vehicles. I'm going to say go. It's going to bring me back some rows from this vehicle table and show me them in a spreadsheet-like format. And it tells me here that there's 103 rows. What if there was 1 million rows? What if there was 30 million rows? What if there was 30 million rows on one machine and 10 million rows on another machine because you're running 2 instances of the database because things got out of hand and your app took off and went wild? All of a sudden, PHP-MyAdmin is horribly inadequate. It works for lots of things, but it doesn't work for everything, and I want everybody to get their head around that idea. And so volume is just one idea. Volume is just one idea. There are other problems with this that we're not going to go into today, but I want you guys to understand that in order to use this tool effectively, it's going to always be best if you understand what it's doing. And that's the reason we're going to try to demystify MySQL in the command line, because all you're asking this thing to do is issue commands that you could issue yourself. And you could issue them yourself fast and secure from anywhere without any of these tools. Right? Imagine logging into PHP-MyAdmin in an airport, and you're on the web at the airport, and I'm sitting next to you, and I have a look over your shoulder and see what you're doing. Pretty scary stuff, right? I mean, you can imagine how it's not always a good idea to use a browser to do things that are administrative by nature. And so I'm not here to bag on PHP-MyAdmin. Of course, it's a fantastic tool. It's awesome. Everybody uses it. I don't use it because it's slower for me to do this than it is to do what I'm going to show you. But that's because I'm a super nerd. That's just kind of the way it goes. So anyway, so PHP-MyAdmin is a tool to allow you to manage your your MySQL instance without knowing code. I'm saying that you should know what it's doing before you start using it. So let's go into the next phase there. So I'm going to get rid of MySQL or PHP-MyAdmin, and I'm going to start here on the MySQL document page. This freaks everybody out. This should not be meant to be freaking. This is not designed to freak you out. It's designed to help you, like all documents. We're going to bounce back and forth between the command line, some notes I've written, and these documents as we work through this. But I want you to understand that there's really 2 big things that we do with MySQL as it relates to the command line. We manipulate the structure of our data. This is how our table's made, how our table's changed, how our table's organized. Think of making new spreadsheets. We do that. That's called manipulating the structure or the data definition. And so in the documents, you have all kinds of commands on data definition stuff. And then you also manipulate the data itself. So the data itself would be, you know, go get me all of the vehicles from my vehicles table, or update these vehicles or delete these vehicles, these kinds of things. So data definition and data manipulation are the 2 keys. So we're going to start with data definition, but first we have to find a server running MySQL. So let's do that. I'm going to use my Mac. I'm not going to use any special tools. I've got some cheat sheet going on over here that I'm going to minimize so that you don't get confused. I'm going to hide it on purpose. And so I'm going to use my Mac. I'm not going to use any special tools, and I'm going to open up a program called Terminal. And so Terminal, most of us know what this is. I'm just going to search for it on my Mac. If I looked in my applications folder, it would probably be like Applications Utilities Terminal or something like that. But I just searched for it, which is no big deal. So this is what we call the command line. So terminal is a piece of software, technically we're manipulating the command line using terminal. And I can look at my computer. You notice here, David Book's computer. This is just a pathway into everything on my computer. That's all I'm doing. But I don't want to look at my computer. I want to look at a remote computer at some other location that's running MySQL so I can manipulate it. And so this isn't a lesson on Linux on how to mess with command line necessarily in a basic sense, but we are going to go through some basics because not everyone has done this. But I'm going to use a piece of software called SSH, which comes on every Mac, and it's a piece of software that allows me to securely connect to another computer. You'll hear that referred to as the shell or a secure shell. I'm just going to type in SSH, which is the command on the command line to use that program. I'm going to type in a username, which is root, because I'm going to log in as the boss of this server that we're connecting to. I'm going to type an IP address in here, 184.106.71.150. That's an address to a computer. I'm going to hit return. Great. That machine is saying, cool, what is your password to connect to this machine? I'm typing my password. You're not seeing it because that's the way it works. And now I've connected to a server. It's that simple. So this happens to be an instance in the Amazon cloud that's running CentOS, which is a Linux flavor of software, but this is just a server running free, open source Linux backend. No big deal. I said that this is not a Linux lesson, but I can do things like navigate the computer, and you see all these blue words. These are folders. Just like in Finder, you have folders, documents and music and library. Same thing in Linux. We have folders. So we're not talking Linux today. We're talking MySQL, but I wanted to show you how simple this is. We connected to a machine. I used the ls command and said list all the folders in this directory. That's all I'm doing. And so that's where we stand now. I'm going to type clear to get rid of all this so we're not distracted. Still connected to the server. And now I'm going to connect to the MySQL instance running on this server. So what we're going to do is I'm going to simply type MySQL, again, telling the server use this piece of software. I'm going to type -u for user. I'm going to type in root because that's the user I'm going to log in as. I'm going to type in -p for password. I'm asking this server to connect to the Microsoft, I keep saying Microsoft, to the MySQL instance and ask me for the password for a username root. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to hit enter and say, great, what's your password? I'm going to enter my password, which it doesn't show you the password when you're entering it, which is good. And now I'm connected to this database server. So if you go back to the PHP MyAdmin example, this is not all of the databases. This is the overall instance of this MySQL server. It might have one database, it might have a million databases. I'm just connected to the MySQL command line, and I'm going to try to demystify this. So, generally, in most cases, you already know what database you're going to manipulate. But we don't have one, so let's make one. Let's make a database using the command line called myDatabase. In PHP MyAdmin, it would be 4 or 5 different clicks. Create a database, you choose a character set, you do all these complicated things, you'd fill in a bunch of rules, and you'd say create, and then it'd say, oh, you need a user, and now you got to create a user, and on and on and on and on. I'm just going to type this statement here, and I'm going to create a database called myDatabase. It's already done. We've already done this. I pasted it and ran it, and it worked. So I typed, by cheating with copy and paste, create database, the name of the database in quotes. I told MySQL to use what we call the default character set. This is not Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, anything like that. Encode it with UTF-8, which is kind of the world standard. And I hit enter, and you'll see there's a little semicolon at the end of my statement, and it made me a database. So again, conceptually, this has already happened. It already happened. It's there. It's waiting for us to manipulate. Now, you wouldn't create databases over and over and over again. Normally, you create them and get your app running or your website running or your client's backend running or something. You just create it once, and you're done doing that. But in this case, we didn't have one, so we're going to create one. So the next thing we have to tell MySQL you notice we're still on the command line here with the MySQL, we call this the prompt, is what database to use. Picture the list of databases on the left of phpMyAdmin. We tell that tool which database we want to play with by clicking one. Use this database, use this database. Well, we have to issue a command to our command lines called use. Pretty simple. Use, and then we name the database. Use my database, which is the database we just created. My cursor's not flashing. Did I lose my power? Okay, there we go. So use my database, semicolon, all SQL statements end with a semicolon, enter, database changed, done. So now I'm using that database. All right. So picture phpMyAdmin, what would have happened, right? It would have showed us all this stuff about this database that I don't even necessarily care about at this point. But we just said use my database. Cool. So let's ask it what tables exist. What spreadsheets exist in this database? I can just say show tables from my database, right? I don't have to use the word from because I'm already using that one. Show tables. It's going to say empty. There aren't any. Cool. That makes sense. We just made a database. Doesn't have any tables in it. On we need to go. So let's make a table or two. So again, I'm copying and pasting here, but there's a certain syntax that you use with the create table statement to alter the data definition of this database. So let's go back to the web real quick. Remember data definition statements we talked about? There are some commands that you issue that don't have anything to do with your data itself, but have to do with the structure of your data. So this is in essence making a new spreadsheet. So you can alter spreadsheets, tables, create spreadsheets, right? Drop, which is delete. You can create and alter and drop spreadsheets all day long.
This is David Book. He's the one who's talking here.
All these commands. So we're going to use the create statement to create a table. I could click on this statement or this link here in the reference, and I could see the syntax that they want us to use. And it's saying create a table. We need a name for the table, and we need some columns. So in my cheat sheet here, I'm going to create a table called table companies, and I'm going to have 3 columns in that table. Or think of across the top of our spreadsheet. An ID representing each company. It's going to be automatically incremented each time we add a new company. I'm going to put in a company name and a company address. That's all I'm doing. So for each row, for each column, we have to give it a name for the column, the type of data we want, and then optionally some additional rules for this column. So I'm saying make a name column, variable character type data, allow up to 50 characters, right? Basic type stuff. So ID's integer, name is varchar, different people say it different ways. But there's a lot of different data types, dates, floats, booleans, blob, there's all kinds of different data types. We're just making a simple table. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it in my command line. And I'm going to hit enter, and I'm done. I've got a table now. So if I now run that same command, show tables, I get one table in my list. Table companies. Doesn't have any data in it. Right? No data. It's an empty spreadsheet. I could issue a select statement, select all columns from table companies, and you'll see that it has nothing in it. It's empty. I could issue another select statement like, I don't know, what is it, show columns from table companies. I'm going from memory here. Yeah, there we go. So there's a statement that shows us what our table looks like. So now we can begin to visualize using the command line what this table looks like. And this is important if we've never messed with this database before. Maybe it's somebody else's and we logged in and we have to understand how the thing's laid out. So we can see everything we want to see in phpMyAdmin right from the command line, in my opinion, much simpler. So we have 3 columns. We call them fields. Got the type of data. Does it accept null characters or not? Right? Pretty simple. So let's insert some rows into this company table. I've cheated here. in my cheat sheet, and I'm going to use the insert command, which, back to our reference, this is going to be data manipulation, not definition. Insert, delete, select. So here's the insert syntax. And what you'll see is it's going to ask you for the name of the column. We want to insert the name and the address into this company table. And then we provide the values, the name and the address. So this row right here will insert one record, one company. Okay, so that's done. I can string rows together. I'm just copying and pasting here. And it's still done instantly. There is no waiting. So now if we say select all from table companies, we get all three of these rows that we inserted. So we get the ID, we get the name, and we get the address. Pretty simple stuff. So now it begins to look like a spreadsheet. So that's pretty cool. And I think that just alone right there is enough for lots of people to just go running away with like, oh my goodness, really? I can just see the data just like that? Yeah, you can. It's not that big of a deal. So now let's create another table called employees. Just going to copy my syntax here. Now we've got employees. I'm going to insert 4 rows into employees. So employees has company ID, first name, last name, and title. Okay, so we now have companies and we now have employees. I think most of you are recognizing like, oh, I see what's going on here. If we select all from companies, we get a list of our 3 companies. If we select all from employees, if I can do a typo here, we get all 4 of those employees that I typed in. But we don't know what company any particular employee works for. Or do we? You'll notice that in my definition for my employees table, I included a column called company ID. And now I think most of us will recognize right away that, I see, the company ID column allows us to create a relationship between every employee and where they work. So just by visualizing these 3 company rows and these 4 employee rows, I think most of us would be able to answer the question, where does Mickey Mouse work? Okay, Mickey Mouse has a company ID 2 in his row, so he must work at Walmart. There's an instant relationship based on this company ID. So if I said, who works at Safeway, you'd probably say nobody, because nobody in the employee list has a company ID 3. So this is where we begin to create these relations between our data. And so when we execute more powerful commands, such as what we call joins, watch what happens when I do this. If I say, hey, go get me all of the data in these tables, go get me the company ID, the company name, the employee's first name, the employee's last name, now I have a different kind of list. And now I know that David works at Costco in one, quote, spreadsheet. Right? So what ends up happening is you're, with the select statements, you're creating spreadsheets in memory that you can use in your application, and then they get thrown away. They're not saved permanently. It's not a table. When you create a table, you're persisting data over the long term in an organized way. But when you run a select statement, you're just loading the results of your question into a table, into a spreadsheet, an in-memory spreadsheet that has the columns that you decide. So the first name and last name column, you see, I wrote that right in my select statement. So maybe I want a spreadsheet that doesn't say first name and last name in the column. Maybe I want select first name as first, last name as last from table employees. Watch what happens here. I get the same results, but look, my column headers have different names now. That's because this is an in-memory representation of my request for data. And this becomes really, really important when you're consuming this data, say in an app. The names of the columns that you create with your queries really can really speed you up. You don't want to have a database with a big, long 40-character name. You might have a database with a big, long 40-character name for some field, but when you run your query, you might want to just call it first or last or address instead of address, city, state, and zip or something like that. And so you can create these in-memory representations or spreadsheets of data that you can then consume in your apps. And so you can do all of this in MySQL's command line to see what you're doing and write your queries and test your queries' performance and do all these different things before you bake them into your apps, before you bake them into your PHP, for example. Because one of the worst things that will happen to a developer is you'll write all kinds of crazy code in PHP and then learn that it's just not efficient database type code. And it's sometimes so much easier to start here, run your queries here, make sure you understand the data that they're returning, get that all nailed down before you work in PHP so that you're just kind of good. There's something horribly inefficient about jumping around between 3 different pieces of software while you try to develop. And so this data layer, this MySQL data layer, is I think quite simple. And yeah, it takes a little bit of practice like everything does. Yeah, it's a little intimidating because it's the command line and people get freaked out by that, but it's so like liberating knowing that all I got to do is throw open a terminal somewhere, log in, and change and see and back up and terminate and deploy new databases and do all kinds of things with a few simple commands. And so inserting data, deleting data, updating data. What if we wanted to change like David's name to Joe, right? I could easily say update table employees, set first name equals Joe, where last name equals book, just as an example. And now I'm done. So when we run this select query next time, we'll run the same one, show me where these people work. You'll see that it's no longer David Book, it's David Joe. Or Joe Book, I should say. So you can manipulate super fast. And if you have 1,000,000 rows, or 100,000 rows, or even 20,000 rows, or 10,000 rows on some of these slow machines, these low-dollar machines, you can do it instantly. And if you try to run some of these queries in PHP-MyAdmin on an underperforming machine, it's alarmingly slow sometimes. And sometimes it won't work at all because it'll like time out because the web server that's running PHP will tell you can't do that. And there's all these rules around running a browser-based solution instead of running the command line. So I'm always advocating the command line because I'm a nerd, but there's other reasons why it makes perfect sense. So I would encourage you guys to learn how to do the fundamental things, how to connect to the server, how to create a database. I've got this cheat sheet I'll give everybody. How to connect to the server, how to create a database, and how to issue commands. That's all you're doing. And so there aren't very many commands. You can just Google MySQL commands, and you'll see the short list of them. Some of them are going to be related to creating the structure of your data. Some of them are going to be related to selecting data from and manipulating that data. But that's about it, right? There's not a whole lot more to it. Yes, there is lots more to it if you want. There's all kinds of advanced topics about performance and backup and scaling and tuning, and that's a whole nother kind of can of worms. But the good news is you can do all of that, 100% of everything you can do with this software you can do from the command line. And it's fast and it's secure and it's awesome. And so I'm going to stop talking there, Sue. I'm going to kind of turn it back over to you and see if we have any questions or whatever. I've not been monitoring the chat. I'm guessing there's all kinds of interesting levels of expertise in our meeting.
Yeah. Well, it kind of started LA asking questions about how do you upload data to, but I think you answered that question as you were going through. You have to insert. First, you have to have a table to load it to. First a database, then a table, and then you have to you follow the insert command that you showed us for how you add a record.
So he might be asking a different question, which is okay. Excuse me, I'm texting real quick. What if you have a large spreadsheet of data and you want to insert and get it into your database? And that's a fantastic question. And so let's analyze this both ways. So PHP-MyAdmin, you would upload the file, assuming it lets you upload a file big, and then you would import it into a database table. So in the command line, you can do the exact same thing. The command line, if you would want to Google two things. How do I upload files using the command line from your computer to your server? And then how do you import those files into MySQL? And so if you look at the documents here, and you go back to insert data, insert syntax, look here, there's a load data in file. What do you know? So you're going to type load data, the file name on your server, where did you put the file, and then you would have to describe the columns in the file versus the columns in the table, and off you go. You can totally do that, LA. It's a fantastic practice, actually. And a good little exercise you'll see, like in computer science class, is they'll give you a file, and they'll say create a table and then import this data, and it's fun, and you mess around, and it's good practice to constantly try to do those things.
Mm-hmm. So you'd have to upload the file to your server first. You couldn't do it
Exactly.
on your computer because this is actually talking to your server.
You could do it all in once if you really wanted to. It's just a much more complicated command.
Okay.
So you can use different technologies on the command line to move a file from your computer to your server and then open it and then import it. Mm-hmm. I think most of us would be better suited FTPing the file somewhere on our server mm-hmm. to a folder and then using MySQL to open and import that file.
Mm-hmm. You can see the benefits for a client too, because you can actually get the information into a table. A client could give you a CSV file or an Excel file. You would export it as CSV, and then you could, from that, you'd have to make sure your columns were aligned. What if your columns weren't perfectly aligned? They'd have to be perfectly aligned with your table, otherwise you wouldn't.
Not necessarily, and that's what they're telling you where you have fields and columns. If you look at the syntax here, you can describe in your statement what columns you want to use in your data. Like, what if you had a company spreadsheet that had, like our company table here had company name and address, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, company name and address. Mm-hmm. What if you had address, city, state, zip? Mm-hmm. Right? Separate headers in your spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. In your statement, you would what we call concatenate. You would connect address, city, state, zip from the spreadsheet all into one and insert that into the address column. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that data, we usually call that data massaging. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can get really complicated when you're trying to migrate data from one persistent data store, a spreadsheet, to another type of persistent data store, a relational database. And that data massaging that goes on in between those steps, sometimes it's very complicated and hard. Sometimes it's really easy. It just depends on how crazy the information is and how much you have. But yeah, there's database experts that are absolutely capable and accustomed. They do this every day. Mm-hmm. Think of a guy that works for UPS that has tens of billions of rows of data mm-hmm. in his kind of umbrella of responsibility, and people are throwing him data all day long in all kinds of crazy formats, and they're saying, babysit all this. Make it usable for the statisticians in the other office. Mm-hmm. He says, okay, and he manipulates that data all day long. Always keep in mind the security and the scalability and how it's organized, but it comes from disparate places, mm-hmm. spreadsheets and emails, and it's crazy. And guys, gals, people do that for a living. For a living.
Oh, Danny has a suggestion here too. wget and tar. I don't know what these are.
Yeah, so wget is a piece of software on your server that you can use to make a web request for a file. So, for example, I hit enter in my browser here, and I make a web request, right? What am I requesting? And I'm not trying to be short here, but we're asking for a web page. Mm-hmm. Right? What if I wanted to get this web page on my server? That's what wget's for. So check this out. If I go back to our command line here, I say buy or quit. I can't remember quit. Yeah, there we go. And I go back to our command line. If I say wget, this is on a Linux server, and paste an internet address, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to get that file, just like a browser. So wget is a browser without an interface. Go get the document, the PDF, the whatever, the spreadsheet, whatever it is, go get it from this address.
What do you see, though? You must just see...
You don't see it. It's on the server now. It's stored. And look, it just showed you load data.html is what I just downloaded and saved to this computer with the wget command. So if you wanted to load a spreadsheet onto your server, all you'd need to know is the address to it. And now that spreadsheet is on the server. So this thing saved this file as loaddata.html. It's just a text file on the server now. So when I type the ls command, remember these blue folders? And I said they're like Finder, your folders in Finder. Look, there's a green one now. This is a file. It's not a directory. It's a file I just downloaded and saved from this web address. So there's the answer to your question. You said, where is it? It's sitting in the same folder I'm looking in.
So for a client, so that's why Danny's saying it's useful. A client tells them to get a spreadsheet that's on a web address. He could just take this wget and get that file put onto his server in just one line.
Bingo. So wget downloads the file to your server. Then you would use MySQL to load data in file into your tables. That's exactly right. No FTP required.
What's the second one? That first one was really good. What's the second one? The XVFR.
So untar is a sophisticated word. Just say unarchive.
Unarchive.
So oftentimes you're dealing with files that are really, really big and they're zipped up. Right? We use the word zip, compressed. You download a Buzztouch project, it's zipped up into a bunch of files. So a tar, sometimes referred to as a tarball, is the same thing. It's just a different type of compression. So you would wget the tarball, which is a folder full of a million things, and then you would unarchive it with the tar command, xvfz, and you'd have everything all on your server. So I know Danny's talking about this stuff because he uses this all the time to install Buzztouch self-hosted.
Oh.
Why download it and re-upload it when you can just log into a server and download it with wget, unzip it, and there it's done? See the difference between that? If you download it to your computer, unarchive it, use FTP to then FTP upload to some other server, when you don't need to do any of that, you just log into the server, go to the directory where you want it, wget, download the zip from Buzztouch, and then unarchive it, you're done.
Wow.
It literally takes 30 seconds to install Buzztouch Server if you understand this.
Yeah. Can you show
30
us?
seconds.
Show us one. Can you show us?
I don't want to install it here, but let me show you. I will. Watch. Check this
I
out.
think that's really helpful.
Yeah, so check this out. Danny the Wizard.
You are a wizard, Danny.
Go to Buzztouch.
And that's his secret, Dan. That's your secret, Danny.
No, this is why we hang out like this.
Yeah, that's cool.
If I go to Buzztouch and I go to, I got to log in. Danny, do you have the URL for the download? Can you paste it in the thing?
He probably does.
See if he's listening. I could find it, but I don't want to always say no.
Okay.
Somebody else logged into their control panel. Paste me the download URL for the Buzztouch self-hosted.
Because it's a race to see who can do it first.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so here's the URL.
Oh, Chris got it.
I'm on the server.
CakeBit one.
Right? I'm on the server somewhere. I probably don't want to put the self-hosted server in the root. I would change directory and I would go to like, I don't know, var www. There you go. So maybe I want to put it here in my www directory. Right? wget. Go get the zip and download it. There, it's done. It's downloaded. It's on the server. See, it says right here, saving to, 100%. It's done.
But how can that be? How can it do it so much faster? How can it move all those files?
It's not a browser with 50 million other things that it's trying to do. You're just saying, go get this file.
Yeah.
So I know you're surprised, and I'm
surprised how
a
fast.
little bit because this stuff is so liberating once you understand.
Yeah.
So I'm using Linux, so if I say list the contents of this directory now, look, I've got a zip right here. It's sitting on the server. I just used ls, list. I hit enter, and it shows me that there's a folder, or there's a zip directory. There's a folder called CGI bin. There's an air folder, and these are all folders on this server. Imagine Finder.
So it put all those files from the BT self-hosted in that 1 second onto a server. That's amazing.
It's only a 2K download.
Oh, yeah. Still, but I'm still impressed.
Small download.
It takes forever to not forever. It takes a while to upload it. It has a couple big packages in there. But
that's the whole point of why we're exploring the command line, demystifying it.
Yeah, Danny, you're brilliant. Wow, that's cool.
But how do I remove that? Right, I want to get rid of this zip.
Yeah.
Now we're not even talking about MySQL. We're talking about Linux. So RM is remove, name of the file. It's going to confirm. Yeah, now it's gone. Now when I list the directory contents, it's gone. So you can manipulate your folders and your files in the command line 1,000 times faster than using some graphic tool like FTP.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is why we explore these ideas, so that people can get liberated about how this works. I'm going to back up. Andy's saying this is more exciting than RedTube. I'm going to back up to something that LA asked, and it was a great question, but I need to revisit it. How can I use the SQL in an app?
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about what SQL is, the answer is, of course, that depends on what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to answer it like this. You can use the SQL language, select query language, insert, update, delete, these kinds of things that we are exploring, in an iOS or in an Android app if you have an SQL database in your app. And I keep going on Microsoft today, but the MySQL engine that we talked about today runs on Linux. It's not an app, it's a server. SQLite, which is another piece of software that runs in an iPhone or an Android app, is the exact same syntax. So Google SQLite in my app, and you'll see how to do it. Mm-hmm. And so you basically include a database in your app project, and then you can query it and insert records and delete records and all that kind of stuff. It's the exact same thing. So yeah, the command line is really, really, really powerful and cryptic and simple, and it freaks people out because they're used to interfaces. But think about this. This is a UI. This is a GUI. This is a graphical user interface. This is not as simple as you think it is. These commands that I'm typing, like list the contents of the current directory, or remove this file called loaddata.html, these commands that I'm issuing are every bit as powerful as clicking a button in a piece of software that makes it visual. Mm-hmm. We've been instructing computers to follow our commands since the beginning of computing. Mm-hmm. And if you can get your head around Linux commands, just Google Linux shortcuts. There's a million of them. Mm-hmm. It is so much faster than reaching for mice and dragging around files and folders in your computer visually. And I know that sounds crazy, but there are nerds out there that don't even use, a mouse and a desktop, and it just is too slow. So obviously there are cases when imagine all of the hundreds of commands you'd need to use to say like Photoshop, right? There's some programs where it would just be ridiculous, and you need an environment where you can see what you're doing. But in our case, most of the time as back-end developers and database people and app developers, we don't have to see everything. We just have to understand it. And if we know how a file folder is set up, because we've seen Finder a million times, and we understand that everything in this screen here that's blue is just a folder, and everything that's red or green is just a file, and everything that's red is an archive, it doesn't take long before you realize, wait a minute, Finder's kind of lame. So and I'll give you an example of that. I'm still logged in as root right now to this remote server. If I say log out, I'm gone now. Connection closed. So if I issue the same command, ls, remember I issued that right here, list. List says list the contents of the directory I'm in. So in Finder it is open up Finder, click a folder, right? List the directory contents of something I click on. If I just type in list now, I'm on my computer, David Book's computer. I'm no longer on the server. It just listed to me the same folders as I would see if I clicked my hard drive. There you go. It's just a command that does the same thing as this interface. If I want to change directory to my applications folder, in Finder, it's shortcut applications, right? In the command line, I just change directory with the CD, applications. I list them now, and here they all are. Oh, I'm actually not in David Book. I'm in the root. So there's three things. So if I go to users. David Book's computer. I'm not going to explore my machine in front of everybody, but the point is, you can absolutely, as Smug Wimp's saying, scalpel. It's a scalpel. You can do anything. You can save lives or take them. You're exactly right. You can absolutely screw things up. Totally. There's no doubt about it. But we need to move beyond that, worrying too much, and know that we've got our stuff backed up, and if something goes wrong, we can always fix it from there. And we got to get better at this and not be intimidated at the tools that are really necessary to make you fast and efficient and honestly worth money. You know, if you can administer a Linux server, all that really means is you don't need Finder. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Putting files somewhere on your computer is not rocket science. And you should be able to do that on the command line. And then you can do a lot of other things on the command line. PSM Danny's saying best practice is try to use it with MAMP. He's totally right. You can get your local machine running an instance of Apache and MySQL and the LAMP stack with a product called MAMP, which is free. I think I have MAMP running on my machine. Let's see. Yeah, MAMP app. Check this out. See here? I can launch a server Apache and MySQL on this machine. Am I still sharing my desktop?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I can launch, an Apache server and a MySQL instance on this machine with this thing called MAMP, which is cool. It's a great tool. I don't use it very often because it's just easier for me to. I'm logging into lots of machines every day, so it's easier for me to just go straight command line. But that just comes from practice. But demystifying MySQL, the takeaways from this are, it's just spreadsheet type data that you can organize using the command line or phpMyAdmin. But phpMyAdmin makes it, in my opinion, far more complicated than it needs to be. And you can do anything with the command line. You just have to basically Google the command. You're not going to remember it. I mean, you're not going to remember all of them, but you'll remember lots of them as you do it. And it's wildly liberating to know that you can spin up servers for $5 a month in the Amazon cloud, move data around, buy a domain name, point it to this IP address, done. Right? And these things, Danny showed us how you can install a BT server instance in 30 seconds. Right? It's true. It's not that hard if you've done this before. And so we use things like FTP and Finder and all these little icons in my dock and all this kind of stuff because we don't fully understand what's happening. And I of course embrace that. It's fantastic that we can do that. But we do need to reach beyond that sometimes as developers and try to understand. Look, if we're going to issue commands to the computer, we ought to know what they're doing. We ought to know what we're issuing. And so that's kind of my preachy little post-code camp rant. Let's pretend we know what we're doing when we fire up a piece of software and start clicking around. Anyway, yeah, I don't see any questions.
I think I'll turn off the recording now. We can then I can turn off the mic so we can ask some questions. Okay.